Before we go any further, drop your coordinates in the comments. Let me know exactly where on the map you are watching from tonight, because what we are about to look at is a threat that quietly connects the entire Pacific Basin. At precisely 8, 5, and 56 seconds in the morning, Alaska time, on April 25, 2026, the seafloor, about 90 kilometers south of Sandpoint, twitched. It was not a violent rupture. It was a magnitude 5.4 earthquake, localized at a depth of roughly 35 kilometers. In the cold, clinical language of modern seismology, this is background noise. It is the geological equivalent of a clearing throat in a crowded room. An event of this size, in a highly active subduction zone, should be logged, tagged, and promptly forgotten. And yet, less than 3 minutes later, the United States Tsunami Warning System did something it almost never does for an anomaly this small. It fired. An urgent alert ripped across the network, telling an entire stretch of coastal communities along southern Alaska to brace for a potential wave. 3 minutes. That is faster than most people can find their car keys in the morning. In the world of geophysical decision-making, it is essentially instantaneous. So, we are left with a terrifying paradox. Why did a state-of-the-art hazard algorithm react to a minor tremor as if a catastrophe was already unfolding? The answer is not in the seismic data. The system did not glitch, and it did not panic. It fired because it recognized the coordinates. And what I am about to walk you through is the anatomy of one of the strangest, deadliest, and most institutionally haunted corridors of seafloor on our planet. A magnitude 5.4 earthquake should not have made the tsunami system blink, but in this isolated stretch of the Pacific, the number was never the real warning. To understand the system's reaction, we must first understand the ground it was watching. The earthquake occurred in a corridor stretching along the eastern end of the Aleutian arc. This is where the massive Pacific plate dives beneath the North American plate at a rate of roughly 6 to 7 centimeters per year. That might not sound like much. It is roughly the speed at which your fingernails grow. But over geological time, that constant, grinding convergence builds up enormous stresses in the rock. The Aleutian megathrust, the interface where these two plates meet, is one of the longest in the world, running for thousands of kilometers along the southern edge of Alaska. But here is what people do not generally appreciate about this particular megathrust. It is not uniform. It does not behave the same way along its entire length. Some sections rupture frequently in moderate events. Some sections lock up tight, accumulating stress for centuries before releasing it in one cataclysmic slip. And then, there are the strange ones. The eastern segment, the corridor near Unimak Island where the 2026 earthquake occurred, is a problem child. It is a part of the fault that does things you cannot predict from standard tectonic theory alone. In this specific corridor, the rules that govern every other piece of subduction zone real estate on Earth seem to bend, twist, and occasionally break entirely. A small earthquake here is not the same as a small earthquake anywhere else. If the number M5.4 is not enough to terrify the warning system, it is because the system knows that in this specific trench, the magnitude is a liar. The risk is not in the size of the rupture. The risk is in the memory of the coordinates. So, what exactly did this stretch of seafloor do in the past to be treated with such extreme institutional suspicion? We have to go back to a cold, gray morning in April 1946. At about 2:0 inches the morning local time on April 1st, the seafloor south of Unimak Island ruptured. By the seismic instruments of the time, the earthquake was classified as roughly a magnitude 7.4. That is a respectable earthquake. But it is not, on its own, the kind of event that produces a wave capable of crossing 4,000 kilometers of open ocean to slaughter people in another country. The shaking, where it was felt at all, was described as moderate. There was no sense of imminent catastrophe. The earthquake did not look dangerous. It looked manageable. But roughly 5 minutes after the earthquake began, the wave arrived. The first shore the water hit was a thin, exposed strip of rock at the southwestern tip of Unimak Island. Standing watch over this remote passage was the Scotch Cap Lighthouse. It was a reinforced concrete structure, multiple stories tall, anchored deep into the bedrock, and perched high on a cliff above the sea. It was built to withstand the full fury of the North Pacific, and it had done so for decades. Then, the ocean simply removed it. The run-up at Scotch Cap, the height to which the water rose above sea level, was measured at approximately 42 meters. Let that sink in. 42 meters. That is a wall of water, 138 feet tall, higher than a 1-4-story building. Concrete is not a meaningful obstacle to a wave like that. Steel rebar is not a meaningful obstacle. The entire lighthouse, with its cast iron lantern and decades of history, was scraped off the cliff and erased. The 5 men on duty did not survive. They had no warning at all. They were there, and then they were not, leaving behind nothing but a bare cliff swept clean to the foundation. The lighthouse was built to survive storms. It was not built to survive the ocean standing up. If the destruction had stopped at Scotch Cap, it would have been recorded as a localized tragedy, but the 1946 event rewrote the rules of geophysical science because the wave did not stop. It had merely cleared its throat. After erasing Scotch Cap from the map, the wave kept going. It radiated outward from the source in expanding rings, traveling across the deep ocean at roughly the speed of a passenger jet aircraft. There is a terrifying physics to a tsunami in deep water. In the open Pacific, a wave like this is almost invisible at the surface. The wave height might be only a meter or two, spread over a wavelength of hundreds of kilometers. A ship sailing through it would feel nothing at all. The ocean would not look angry. The horizon would remain perfectly flat. But beneath that deceivingly calm surface, an enormous volume of water was in motion, propagating across the basin with a kind of patient inevitability, heading towards shorelines where it would soon pile up and become catastrophic. Exactly 4 hours and 34 minutes after the rupture in Alaska, the leading edge of the wave reached the Hawaiian Islands. The town of Hilo, on the eastern coast of the Big Island, sits inside a wide bay geometrically tuned, almost as if by malicious design, to amplify incoming waves from the north. Hazard scientists call Hilo Bay a tsunami trap. When a Pacific Basin tsunami arrives here, the bay does not dissipate it. The bay focuses it. On the morning of April 1st, 1946, the people of Hilo had no warning. There was no Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, no sirens, and no evacuation maps. The earthquake had not been felt in Hawaii at all, because the seismic waves had passed hours before, leaving the ground perfectly still. It was just another morning. Boats were heading out, and school children were gathering along the waterfront. And then, the water did something strange. It pulled back. The harbor began to drain rapidly, as if some enormous plug had been pulled beyond the horizon. Boats grounded on mudflats that had not been visible in living memory. Out of sheer curiosity, people walked down to the waterline to look, because nothing in their experience had prepared them to recognize the warning. The drawback of water is one of the most reliable natural signs of an incoming tsunami. A falling ocean means the trough is leading the way, but the crest, the actual wall of water, is following right behind it. When it arrived at Hilo, it hit with a run-up of approximately 10 meters in places. It swept inland, picking up boats, cars, and buildings, carrying them as a churning mass of debris into the heart of the town. The water peaked, paused, and violently drained back out, dragging everything back into the bay. Multiple wave trains followed, each one deadly. By the time the ocean settled, at least 159 of their neighbors were dead. Many were children caught near the waterfront schools. The waterfront itself was simply gone. The wave did not look like a monster in the open ocean. It carried disaster quietly, invisibly, until the coastline forced it to rise. This brings us to a deeply disturbing question. The seismic instruments told scientists a magnitude 7.4 earthquake had occurred, but a 7.4 does not cross the ocean and wipe a town off the map. How could an earthquake that appeared so moderate on paper create a wave that defied all logic? To answer that, we must look at how an earthquake can lie. How does a disaster of this magnitude hide from the machines designed to detect it? The answer lies in the limitations of our own technology and the terrifying ways the Earth can move. In 1946, the seismographs monitoring the Pacific were mechanical marvels of their era, but they had a fundamental blind spot. They were highly tuned to detect short-period seismic waves. This is the kind of high-frequency shaking that radiates from a typical violent earthquake rupture. If a fault snaps quickly, it sends out a barrage of rapid vibrations, the kind that shatter windows, collapse brick walls, and make the ink needles on seismographs jump wildly. But these instruments were not well equipped to detect long-period waves. These are the slow-rolling oscillations that come from a rupture that lasts longer and propagates more slowly than a normal quake. And the 1946 event, as we now understand it, was exactly that kind of slow rupture. It was an earthquake that took its time. It moved gradually, almost gently along a massive stretch of the fault line, displacing enormous volumes of rock without producing the violent, high-frequency shaking the instruments were watching for. Because the seismographs were listening for a high-pitched scream, they almost entirely missed the deep, low-frequency roar. The scientists who looked at the records on the morning of April first concluded that something significant had happened off the coast of Alaska, but nothing immediately alarming. The seismic instruments of the time classified the event as roughly a magnitude 7.4. That is a respectable earthquake, but it is not, on its own, a basin-scale catastrophe. The shaking, where it was felt at all, was described as moderate. There was no sense of imminent catastrophe, no panic, and no warning system to fire. But the earthquake had lied. Modern seismologists, working with refined techniques and a much better understanding of long-period seismic waves, have since determined that the original estimate was drastically wrong. The actual moment magnitude of the 1946 earthquake was closer to 8.6. Because the magnitude scale is logarithmic, this represents roughly a factor of 60 inches terms of the actual energy released. The earthquake that the instruments of the day caught was merely a shadow of the earthquake that actually happened. Yet, even an 8.6 does not fully explain the water. The tsunami itself had a tsunami magnitude, the so-called Mount scale, which measures the size of the wave rather than the earthquake of approximately 9.3. The simple model, in which seismic moment release directly translates to seafloor displacement, and seafloor displacement directly translates to wave height, simply did not work for 1946. The numbers did not balance. There was a missing term in the equation. The earthquake was mathematically too small to have made a wave that big. This is a critical distinction we must make between confirmed facts and scientific hypotheses. It is an absolute undeniable fact that the tsunami was monstrous, and it is a fact that the initial magnitude reading failed to reflect the true scale of the rupture. But to explain the missing energy, the gap between the seismic data and the 4.2-meter wave at Scotch Cap, scientists rely on strong hypotheses. It is highly probable that the slow rupture was compounded by a massive submarine landslide. The earthquake may have triggered the collapse of up to 200 cubic kilometers of unstable sediment down the continental slope. Whether through slow rupture, a catastrophic landslide, or a combination of both, the lesson of 1946 is chilling. The people on the shoreline and the machines in the laboratories were both fooled. A lack of violent shaking does not guarantee the ocean will remain peaceful. At the shallow edges of a subduction zone, the seafloor can displace far more water than the surface vibrations would ever suggest. The instruments heard a serious earthquake. The ocean answered with something far larger. If an earthquake can be so drastically underestimated, and if a fault can move so quietly while displacing so much water, is there a specific category of earthquake born to deceive both human senses and machine algorithms? There is a specific category of geological event that scientists have learned, slowly and at considerable cost, to fear in a very special way. They are called tsunami earthquakes. The name can be slightly misleading. It does not simply mean any earthquake that produces a tsunami. Rather, a tsunami earthquake is defined as a rupture where the resulting ocean wave is wildly disproportionate to the shaking felt on land or measured by standard high-frequency seismographs. To understand how this happens, we have to look at where it happens. A tsunami earthquake typically ruptures in the shallowest part of the subduction zone interface, near the trench where the rock is weakest and the sediment is exceptionally thick. Because the material here is softer and heavily saturated, the rupture does not snap violently. Instead, The rupture takes longer than a normal earthquake of similar moment magnitude. The slip propagates along the fault at an unusually slow velocity. This slow, grinding tear is highly deficient in high-frequency seismic radiation, the exact type of violent shaking that makes buildings sway, collapses infrastructure, and signals to human beings that they are in immediate, mortal danger. But while the ground surface is barely trembling, the seafloor displacement, the actual physical movement of the ground beneath the ocean, is unusually large. The water column sitting above this displacement gets shoved violently upward or downward by an amount that the modest shaking would never suggest, resulting in a massive tsunami. This is what makes tsunami earthquakes uniquely lethal. They violate our most basic human intuition, the belief that the size of the shaking predicts the size of the threat. Coastal residents who experience a normal magnitude 8 earthquake know instantly that they have just experienced a major event. The ground rolls, people run outside, and the earthquake announces itself as an emergency. But a tsunami earthquake does not announce itself. The shaking, even for a very large rupture, can feel entirely unremarkable, the kind of minor tremor you might just notice and quickly shrug off. There is no obvious body-level alarm to start running for higher ground. The human body, which evolved to interpret violent shaking as a signal of mortal danger, receives a physical signal that is too quiet to take seriously. And then, the wave comes anyway. Detecting these deceptive events in real time is one of the central, unsolved problems of operational seismology. Researchers have developed sophisticated techniques to examine the long-period component of the seismic spectrum, comparing it against high-frequency data to identify these slow ruptures. But all of these analytical techniques require a crucial ingredient: time. And in the context of near-field tsunami warnings, time is the one resource the system does not have. The warning, if it is going to be useful at all, must go out within minutes of the rupture, long before the complex long-period analysis is fully complete. Think of it this way. A normal earthquake is like a massive explosion. It shakes the world loudly and leaves no doubt about its power. A tsunami earthquake is entirely different. It is like a giant, heavy door opening slowly under the sea. It does not create a loud bang, but it silently pushes an unfathomable volume of water out of its way. A normal earthquake shakes the world loudly. A tsunami earthquake moves the ocean quietly. But even the terrifying mechanics of a tsunami earthquake do not fully explain the nightmare of the eastern Aleutian corridor. Because in this specific stretch of the North Pacific, the earthquake might not even be the primary weapon. Sometimes, the shaking is just a switch. When most people imagine the bottom of the ocean, they picture a relatively flat, barren plain of solid rock. But the reality, especially along active subduction margins, is vastly more precarious. The seafloor here is a dynamic landscape of steep continental slopes, plunging canyons, and staggering accumulations of unstable material. Over millions of years, as the Pacific Plate scrapes its way under North America, it operates like a geological bulldozer. It shaves off layers of deep ocean mud, marine sediment, and crushed crustal rock, piling them up along the upper edge of the fault. In the eastern Aleutian corridor, this pile, known as an accretionary prism, is uniquely massive. It is one of the thickest, most sediment-rich wedges anywhere on the planet. Crucially, this material is not solid rock. It is a weakly consolidated, water-saturated sponge. It is draped over the subduction interface at angles that, in some places, defy gravity, sitting perilously close to the absolute threshold of structural failure. This brings us to the terrifying concept of the submarine landslide as a force multiplier. If a slope of wet sediment is already balanced on the razor's edge of collapse, an earthquake does not need to be massive to bring it down. The shaking does not have to be violent enough to destroy cities on land. It just needs to provide a localized nudge, a brief disruption in the pore pressure holding the sediment together. In this scenario, the earthquake is not the disaster. The earthquake is merely the match. The violently unstable, gravitationally precarious slope of accumulated sediment is the gunpowder. When a submarine slope fails, the physics of the resulting tsunami are fundamentally different from a fault rupture. A standard tectonic uplift displaces a broad, shallow area of water, but a landslide creates a highly concentrated, violent displacement. As millions of tons of mud and rock accelerate down the abyssal slope, they laterally and violently shove the water column out of the way. This creates waves with shorter wavelengths but staggering, localized amplitudes. They do not always propagate perfectly across entire ocean basins, but near the source, they are absolute monsters. This mechanism forms the core of a leading scientific hypothesis regarding the 1946 disaster. While the science is still debated and reading the scarred seafloor for definitive proof remains highly difficult, many leading researchers propose that the earthquake triggered an unfathomable slope failure. Estimates suggest a volume of seafloor sediment, possibly up to 200 cubic kilometers, of material detached and plummeted into the deep Pacific. To put that in perspective, that is a mass of rock and mud, roughly equivalent to the entire above-water volume of Mount Fuji, suddenly in freefall beneath the ocean surface. The 4.2-meter wave that erased the Scotch Cap Lighthouse was almost certainly the localized splash of that colossal underwater avalanche. The hazard in this region is deeply nonlinear. The size of the input does not always match the size of the output. A moderate tremor can unlock a geographical nightmare. The quake may have been small, but in this corridor, the quake is not always the disaster. Sometimes, it is only the trigger. But if submarine landslides and tsunami earthquakes can happen in many subduction zones, why is this specific stretch of the eastern Aleutian arc so uniquely predisposed to breaking the rules? What is it about this exact geometry that creates the perfect storm? It is reasonable at this point to ask, why here? The Pacific Ocean is incredibly vast. It is entirely ringed by active subduction zones, dotted with accretionary prisms and tectonic faults of every imaginable variety. So why does the Eastern Aleutian Corridor, more than its neighbors, continually produce these terrifying anomalies? Why does this specific segment behave in such an unsettling, rule-breaking way? The danger does not stem from a single anomaly. It is a fatal convergence of multiple geological factors. Individually, these conditions exist in many subduction zones across the globe. But here, they combine to create an environment effectively optimized for stealth catastrophes. Let us dissect the anatomy of this chaos. First, we must look at the geometry of the descending slab. Here, the Pacific Plate dives beneath the North American Plate at a remarkably shallow angle, only about 10 degrees. Compare this to subduction zones off the coast of Japan, where the slab descends at much steeper angles, sometimes approaching 30 degrees. A shallower slab creates a significantly wider zone of contact between the two tectonic plates near the surface. When a rupture initiates, this extended horizontal contact zone allows the slip to propagate much further up dip, reaching into the shallowest, weakest parts of the system right at the seafloor, where water displacement is most devastating. Second, there is the staggering volume of sediment. For millions of years, the landmass of Alaska has functioned as a gigantic, relentless, glacial grinding machine. Massive ice sheets have repeatedly advanced and retreated across the continent, pulverizing solid bedrock into fine powder. Rivers and glacial meltwater have continuously dumped this pulverized rock into the deep ocean. Consequently, the Aleutian Trench has accumulated one of the thickest accretionary prisms anywhere on Earth. There is simply more loose, unconsolidated material draped over the fault here than almost anywhere else. Third, and perhaps most critically, is the hydrology of this sediment pile. This immense wedge of geological debris is heavily saturated with trapped water. Deep within the sediment layers, the pore pressure, the outward pressure exerted by the fluid trapped between the grains of rock and mud, is abnormally high. This extreme fluid pressure acts as a hydraulic lubricant, counteracting the natural friction that holds the geological structures together. This saturation effectively feeds both of our monsters. By lubricating the megathrust interface, it favors the slow, creeping fault slips characteristic of tsunami earthquakes. Simultaneously, it weakens the structural integrity of the continental slope, drastically lowering the threshold of shaking required to trigger massive submarine landslides. Finally, there is the structural complexity of the upper plate itself. The Eastern Aleutian Corridor sits at a distinctive bend in the island arc. The orientation of the oceanic trench and the precise direction of tectonic plate motion are not perfectly aligned here, producing highly complex, twisting stresses. This has fractured the upper plate, creating secondary splay faults that branch off the main megathrust and cut directly upward through the sediment wedge to the seafloor. In geology, structural complexity almost always translates to behavioral unpredictability. When you add all of these distinct variables together, you get a fault segment flawlessly engineered to produce maximum ocean displacement with minimum surface shaking. Every single condition pushes the system toward the same fatal outcome. This is a corridor where every geological variable aligns to push the system toward the exact same outcome. Less shaking on land, but far more displacement in the ocean. But this raises an urgent, terrifying question. If we know this specific corridor is so perfectly primed for disaster, and if we have the most advanced satellite networks and geophysical sensors in human history monitoring the globe, why can't modern technology see everything happening down there the moment it begins? Even with everything we have learned over the past 80 years, and even with the most sophisticated monitoring infrastructure ever built, there is a fundamental detection problem at the heart of all of this. We have built an incredible network to listen to the Earth, but we are still largely blind to the water. Seismometers, the primary instruments by which humanity knows that the tectonic plates are moving, are absolute marvels of modern engineering. They can detect the vibration of a fault snapping from thousands of miles away, but they are highly specialized tools. They are designed to detect the rapid, violent motion of solid rock. They are not particularly good at detecting the slow, creeping deformation of underwater slopes, the silent sliding of massive mud wedges, or the displacement of the water column above them. They are highly sensitive instruments, but they are tuned to a very specific kind of frequency, and unfortunately, that frequency is not always the one that matters most for tsunami generation. When a massive submarine landslide occurs, it does produce a seismic signal, but it is a vastly different signature than a fault rupture. It tends to be a low-frequency rumble, heavily dispersed in time, and notoriously difficult to localize. In a busy tectonic environment like the North Pacific Rim, where distant earthquakes and regional tectonic noise are a constant hum, the acoustic signature of a landslide can easily be swallowed by the background static. By the time human analysts review the records, run the necessary filters, and identify a probable mass movement, hours or even days may have passed. This timeline is geologically fascinating, but it is utterly useless for real-time tsunami warning. The exact same limitation applies to the slow ruptures of tsunami earthquakes. Because their seismic signature is inherently deficient in the high-frequency energy that traditional warning algorithms look for, uncovering their true displacement requires a complex analysis of long-period spectral data. But the crucial constraint remains. The mathematical analysis takes time, and the warning must go out in a matter of minutes. But what about the ocean itself? Don't we have advanced sensors directly in the water? We do. The DART buoy network is the gold standard for confirming that a tsunami is actively propagating across the deep ocean. These buoys sit on the abyssal plain, measuring minuscule changes in water pressure as a wave passes overhead. However, there is a fatal flaw in relying on them for near-field events. A buoy can only detect a wave after the wave has physically passed its location. If a tsunami is generated immediately off the coast, the wave will obliterate the nearby shoreline long before the nearest deep ocean buoy can definitively confirm its existence. The buoys are essential for confirming far-field events that threaten distant shores, but their confirmation often arrives too late for the communities closest to the epicenter. Tide gauges located along the coast offer information even later. By definition, if a coastal tide gauge is recording a massive surge in water level, the wave has already made landfall. For the people standing on the beach, the tide gauge's confirmation is not a warning, it is a post-mortem. Tide gauges are excellent for understanding what happened after the fact, but they are virtually useless for telling you that it is about to happen. This is the terrifying technological void in which the 2026 warning system was operating. It had seismometer data. It had rough estimates of magnitude, depth, and location. It did not yet have buoy confirmation. It did not yet have tide gauge data. It was forced to make a life or death decision under conditions of profound, irreducible uncertainty. Modern science, can detect the earthquake in seconds, but it still cannot always see what the seafloor does next. So, in those frantic first few minutes, when the data is incomplete and the ocean has not yet given its definitive proof, what exactly is the warning system doing? In those frantic, blind minutes immediately following the rupture, the warning system is not waiting for proof. It cannot afford to. Instead, it is performing a high-stakes calculation of probability, operating under a philosophy known in hazard science as the precautionary principle. Here is how the warning infrastructure functions. When seismometers detect a tremor, automated algorithms race to estimate three crucial parameters within seconds. Where did the earthquake happen? How big was it? And how deep was it? Location, magnitude, and depth form the absolute foundation of the decision-making process. Once those initial parameters are estimated, the system runs them through a series of rigid decision thresholds. If the magnitude is below a certain baseline, the system stands down. If the depth is too far beneath the crust to affect the seafloor, the system stands down. These thresholds exist because the vast majority of earthquakes do not produce tsunamis, and the system must filter out the background noise. You cannot send out a global alert every time the ground twitches. Public trust would collapse within weeks. But here is where the engineering becomes an art form. The thresholds are not the same everywhere. The decision rules for a quake in the Central Pacific are not identical to the rules for a quake in the Aleutians. The system has been painstakingly tuned, segment by segment, over decades, to account for what we know about the specific history of each piece of real estate. And the Eastern Aleutian Corridor possesses a unique regional adjustment. It carries a mathematical asterisk. This regional adjustment is, in software terms, a piece of institutional memory. The algorithm does not need a human being to remind it of the 1946 Scotch Cap disaster. The shape of 1946 is already sitting in its decision tree, permanently waiting the outcome. The system has been deliberately tilted toward extreme caution in places where caution has historically been paid for in human lives. When the M5.4 earthquake struck near Sand Point in 2026, the system evaluated the data. The magnitude was low, yes, but the depth was dangerously shallow. The focal mechanism was a thrust event on the megathrust interface, and most importantly, the location perfectly matched the haunted coordinates. The algorithm looked at the seismic signal and asked a single defining question. Given everything we know about this specific place, what is the probability that a catastrophic tsunami is currently forming? I want to be incredibly precise here. We must not anthropomorphize the algorithm by saying it knew a wave was coming. It did not know. A tsunami warning is not a factual statement that a wall of water is actively traveling toward a coastline. Rather, it is a statement about risk. It means the calculated probability has crossed an unacceptable threshold, and the hazard is simply too great to ignore. The system was designed to act on inference, not absolute evidence. It fired the alert because waiting for the deep ocean buoys to confirm the wave would mean sacrificing the very coastal communities the system was built to protect. A tsunami warning is not proof that a wave exists. It is a decision made before proof, because proof often arrives too late. The system made the only rational choice it could make. It chose to warn. It chose to wake people up in the middle of the night, to trigger sirens, and to initiate mass evacuations along the southern Alaskan coast, prioritizing preservation over precision. But this mathematical bias toward caution creates a deeply human problem. If the system is explicitly designed to warn based on probability rather than absolute certainty, it is mathematically guaranteed to occasionally issue warnings for waves that never arrive. And if a system continuously cries wolf, what happens to the people who eventually stop listening? When the automated system fired its warning on the morning of April 25, 2026, it did not just send a packet of data across a server network. It fundamentally disrupted the physical reality of thousands of human beings. In the coastal communities of southern Alaska, sirens began to wail. Cell phones shrieked with emergency broadcast tones. Police officers, firefighters, and emergency managers were forced to execute immediate evacuation protocols, pulling families out of their beds, forcing them to abandon their homes, and funneling them up into the dark, freezing hills above the inundation zone. This is the brutal, unavoidable friction of any hazard management system. When you program a machine to operate on the precautionary principle, when you explicitly tell an algorithm to issue alerts based on the high probability of a catastrophe, rather than the absolute visual confirmation of one, you are making a conscious choice to accept false alarms. And false alarms come with a deeply corrosive cost. In the field of disaster sociology, this phenomenon is known as warning fatigue. Every time an emergency siren sounds and no wave materializes, public trust in the institution fractures just a little bit more. The immediate aftermath of a canceled warning is rarely relief. It is usually intense frustration. Local businesses lose money, critical infrastructure is paralyzed, and people lose sleep. But the most dangerous consequence is psychological. If a system repeatedly cries wolf, human nature dictates that the public will eventually stop listening. The next time the siren sounds, a family might decide to stay in bed, looking at the M5, 4 magnitude on their phones, and assuming it is just another algorithmic glitch. The scientists and engineers who build these warning architectures are intimately aware of this psychological decay. They know that every false alarm burns political capital and public goodwill, but they also understand the terrifying asymmetry of the stakes involved. We must look closely at the math of consequence. The cost of a false alarm is a night of fear, a morning of anger, and a measurable dip in local economic productivity. It is, at its core, a severe inconvenience. But the cost of a missed alarm, the cost of remaining silent because you waited for the deep ocean buoys to provide 100% certainty, is a town wiped off the map. It is the Scotch Cap Lighthouse reduced to a bare cliff in 5 minutes. It is 159 people in Hilo swallowed by the sea because nobody told them to run. This creates the ultimate paradox of disaster preparedness. In a geological environment governed by irreducible uncertainty, a system that never issues a false alarm is a system that is fundamentally broken. If you wait until you are absolutely certain that a near-field tsunami is coming, you have waited too long to save the people closest to the fault. The only way to guarantee that you catch every stealth event, every slow rupture, and every submarine landslide is to cast a net wide enough that it occasionally catches ghosts. The algorithms monitoring the Eastern Aleutian corridor are coated with the blood of 1,946. The designers made a deliberate ethical calculation. They chose to bear the heavy burden of public anger rather than bear the unbearable burden of mass casualties. They chose the false alarm over the missed disaster. Therefore, the true measure of a warning system is not whether it is sometimes wrong, it is whether it is wrong for the right reasons. When you evacuate in the dark and stand shivering on a high ridge, watching a quiet ocean that never rises, it feels like a failure of science. But in reality, it is often the exact opposite. The warning that saves lives may look afterward exactly like the warning that was unnecessary. So, when we look back at the magnitude 5.4 earthquake of 2026, we are forced to answer the central question of this entire event. Was it simply a false alarm, a regrettable overreaction by an overly sensitive machine? Or was the system doing exactly what it was built to do? When the sun finally rose over Alaska on the morning of April 25, 2026, the oceans were calm. The frantic evacuations were called off. The M5. 4 earthquake had remained just that, a moderate tremor. The massive sediment wedges perched on the continental slope had held their ground. No submarine landslide materialized. No 4.2-meter wave erased a coastline. To the general public, it looked like a massive technological overreaction. It looked like a multi-million-dollar early warning system had flinched at a shadow. But within the locked doors of the geophysical community, the event was not viewed as a failure. It was viewed as a perfect execution of algorithmic hazard management. To understand why the system fired, we have to look at the exact telemetry it was processing in those first blind 180 seconds. The automated system did not trigger a red alert simply because a magnitude 5.4 occurred. Such tremors happen constantly in the ring of fire. If the network reacted to the number alone, it would be in a state of perpetual hysteria. Instead, the system fired because of an incredibly specific, highly lethal convergence of data points. It fired because of the synthesis of everything we have discussed. First, the earthquake was entirely offshore. It did not happen deep beneath the Alaskan mainland. It happened precisely on the megathrust interface, beneath thousands of feet of cold ocean. Second, the focal mechanism, the physical geometry of how the rock broke, indicated a thrust event. The seafloor was not just sliding horizontally, it was actively pushing upward. Third, and critically, the epicenter was located inside the exact geographical polygon that scientists know is structurally primed for stealth catastrophes. When the system registered the coordinates just south of Sandpoint, right in the heart of the eastern Aleutian corridor, it automatically applied the regional adjustment. The algorithm cross-referenced the current telemetry with the ghosts of 1,946. The machine logic in those 3 minutes was terrifyingly sound. It recognized that a m54 inches this specific trench could simply be the high-frequency squeak of a much larger, silent tsunami earthquake that its seismometers could not fully resolve. It recognized that even if the rupture was truly only a m54, that amount of shaking was mathematically sufficient to detach a saturated, gravitationally unstable mass of glacial sediment from the continental slope. And finally, it recognized its own blindness. The system knew the nearest dart buoys had not yet registered a pressure change, but it also knew that waiting for that confirmation would doom the coastal communities located just miles from the epicenter. You cannot engineer a warning system to be perfect. You can only engineer it to choose which kind of mistake it makes. You can build a system that waits for absolute certainty and consistently issues warnings too late. Or you can build a system that acts on aggressive probability, saving lives at the cost of occasional public outrage. The scientists who wrote the code chose the latter. They programmed the machine to remember the 159 people who died in Hilo. The alert on April 25th was not a glitch. It was a highly calibrated act of technological preservation. The system did not respond to a number. It responded to a place. To fully grasp the hypervigilance of the warning systems in the North Pacific, we have to look slightly beyond the exact coordinates of the April 2026 tremor. We have to look at the shadow cast by its immediate neighbor. Just to the west of our haunted corridor lies a stretch of the megathrust known to geophysicists as the Schumagen Gap. If the eastern Aleutian zone is famous for the sheer violence of what it has done in the past, the Schumagen Gap is infamous for what it has not done. In the study of plate tectonics, there is a concept known as a seismic gap. Subduction zones are thousands of kilometers long, but they do not break all at once. They tend to unzip in discrete segments. Over the course of a century or two, you would expect every segment of a major fault line to eventually lock up, build stress, and snap, releasing its accumulated tectonic debt. But when you map out the historical ruptures along the Aleutian arc, the magnitude 8.2 inches, 1,938, the devastating 8.6 inches, 1,946, the massive 8.6 inches, 1,957, a terrifying pattern emerges. The ruptures form a nearly continuous line of broken rock, except for one glaring, unbroken stretch. The Schumagen Gap has not experienced a catastrophic, trench-rupturing megathrust earthquake in modern recorded history. The last time this specific patch of the fault fully unzipped and ripped to the surface may have been in 1788. For decades, this silence has been the subject of an intense, high-stakes geological debate. What exactly is happening in the dark? There are two primary schools of thought, and they represent wildly different futures for the Pacific Basin. The first theory suggests that the gap is fully locked. Under this scenario, the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate are snagged on a massive geological friction point. For over 2 centuries, they have been pushing against each other at 6 to 7 centimeters a year, accumulating an unfathomable reservoir of kinetic energy. If this is true, the Schumagen Gap is a loaded spring, capable of producing a magnitude 8.5 or greater earthquake at any moment. The second theory is far less terrifying, but equally profound. Some scientists argue that the gap is not locked at all, but is instead creeping. Because of the specific composition of the rock, Or perhaps the extreme fluid pressure we discussed earlier, acting as a deep earth lubricant. The two tectonic plates might simply be sliding past each other smoothly. They are engaging in what is called a seismic slip, releasing their tectonic stress quietly, continuously, and without violence. Recent events have only deepened the mystery. In 2020 and 2021, significant earthquakes did strike within the broader Shumagon region. But seismological analysis revealed that these ruptures occurred deeper down the fault interface. They did not break the shallowest, most dangerous part of the megathrust near the seafloor, the exact zone required to generate a catastrophic basin-wide tsunami. The deepest parts of the gap cleared their throat, but the shallowest part remains stubbornly, ominously silent. It is vital to understand that the Shumagon Gap was not the direct cause of the magnitude 5.4 earthquake in 2026. The minor tremor was a distinct, localized failure. The gap is not necessarily about to break, and it should not be viewed as an imminent apocalypse. But it is the brooding neighbor. It forms the broader context of the region. When you operate a tsunami warning center, you do not just look at individual data points. You look at the neighborhood. You are monitoring a stretch of the Earth's crust that contains the ghosts of 1,946 on one side and a centuries-old question mark on the other. This underlying uncertainty infects every algorithm and every human decision made about the Aleutian arc. It reminds the scientific community that despite our satellites and our deep ocean sensors, the margin is still largely uncharted territory. We cannot definitively say whether the Shumagon Gap is a ticking bomb or a harmless, creeping fault. And because we do not know, the warning algorithms are designed to layer this uncertainty into their calculations. The gap did not trigger the alert, but its silence is part of the reason scientists listen carefully to this entire margin. We have spent the last hour dissecting the mechanics of a disaster that did not happen. We have looked at tectonic friction, algorithmic anxiety, the saturated sediment wedges of the Aleutian Trench, and the lingering ghosts of 1,946. But all of that geophysical data, all of those billion-dollar deep ocean sensors and supercomputers, ultimately distill down to a single, fragile point of contact: a human being standing on a shoreline, trying to decide what to do next. For those of you watching who live in coastal communities or who plan to travel to them, the magnitude 5.4 earthquake of April 2026 is not just an obscure geological case study, it is a masterclass in survival. It exposes the fatal flaws in how ordinary people understand natural risk. If you take nothing else away from this debrief, you must internalize these foundational rules of the coastline. First, and most critically, you must break the habit of judging your safety by the magnitude number flashing on your smartphone screen. We are conditioned by modern media to only fear the 8, 0s, and the 9, 0s. We look at a 5.4 and we shrug. But as we have seen in the Eastern Aleutian corridor, the number is often a liar. A moderate number does not guarantee a moderate ocean. If you feel an earthquake, the magnitude is completely irrelevant to your immediate survival. What matters is the geometry of the fault, the depth, and the history of the coordinates variables you cannot possibly know in the moment. Do not let a small number talk you out of seeking high ground. Second, you must understand the language of the ground itself. In a near-field event, where the earthquake happens just offshore from your town, the shaking is your only real warning. But do not just gauge the violence of the shaking. You must gauge the duration. If you feel an earthquake that is so violently strong it is difficult to stand, or if you feel a rolling, mild earthquake that lasts for an unusually long time, a minute or more, the Earth is telling you that a massive rupture is unfolding. In those scenarios, you do not wait for a siren. You do not wait for an official alert to hit your phone or your television. You evacuate immediately, and you do it on foot. The machinery of government is fast, but physics is always faster. Third, we must talk about the water. If you are near the ocean and you see the water rapidly retreating, exposing the seafloor, reefs, or mudflats, this is the ocean drawing back the hammer. It is the trough of the wave arriving before the crest. Human curiosity is a deadly instinct in this moment. In 1946, people in Hilo walked down to the exposed harbor to look at stranded fish. They died because they did not recognize the mechanics of the ocean. If you see the water withdraw, turn your back to it and run. The ocean will return, and it will return with the force of a concrete wall. Finally, we need to redefine how we view canceled warnings. The next time the sirens wail in the middle of the night, and you spend 3 freezing hours shivering on a high ridge only to watch the sun rise over an undisturbed sea, do not curse the system. Do not let the relief curdle into cynicism. Cynicism is what kills people the next time the siren sounds, when they decide to roll over and go back to sleep. The system was not wrong on April 25th. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do, operating in the dark, acting on probability, and buying you the one resource that cannot be engineered: time. A canceled warning is not a failure of science. It is a successful simulation of your own survival plan. The safest warning is not always the one that proves dramatic. Sometimes it is the one that gives people time and then disappears quietly. By the end of the day, on April 25th, 2026, when the sun had fully risen over Alaska, the truth was finally confirmed. The magnitude 5.4 earthquake never grew into a catastrophe. No wall of water materialized. The dart buoys out in the deep ocean, our silent sentinels, recorded nothing but the steady, rhythmic pulse of normal tides. The coastline remained intact. No lighthouses were swept away, and no new names had to be carved into memorials. Everything returned to its normal rhythm. The coastal residents went back to their homes, breathed a sigh of relief, and life carried on. But that peaceful outcome does not make the decision to warn meaningless. On the contrary, it is the ultimate proof of a system operating exactly as its most profound humanitarian philosophy intended. The Pacific Tsunami Warning System did not overreact. It executed a maneuver of absolute defense. It proved that the architects who wrote those algorithmic lines had memorized the bloody lessons of 1946. They understood that in this high-stakes gamble with the ocean, especially in a corridor as treacherous as the eastern Aleutians, waiting for absolute certainty is often a death sentence for thousands. Science and technology can give us the most powerful supercomputers, global satellite networks, and hypersensitive sensors planted deep on the abyssal plain. But even the most sophisticated tools have an unbreakable limit. They cannot alter the laws of physics, and they cannot buy time. When a colossal wedge of saturated sediment, unstable and perched on a continental slope, is ready to collapse into the ring of fire, time is the one resource humanity will never have enough of. The ocean always keeps its own counsel and never sends a warning letter before it strikes. It only tells us it is rising by actually rising. And the only barrier standing between that fury and the fragile human lives on the shoreline is a machine willing to make a terrifying decision in just 3 minutes, based on imperfect information, in a geological corridor that has exhausted every ounce of our caution. That magnitude 5.4 earthquake was a cold reminder. The eastern Aleutian corridor is still there, quiet but not asleep. The tectonic plates are still grinding against each other at 6 to 7 centimeters a year. The massive sediment wedges born from the Ice Age are still hanging over the continental slopes, precarious as the sword of Damocles in the dark. They are waiting for the right match. Just enough of a pressure disruption to trigger a cascading collapse that we will not see until it is already at our shores. That is the brutal bargain of living on the edge of the Pacific. And that is exactly the story the number 5.4 was trying to tell us that morning, if we were quiet enough to listen. The next time the Earth shakes at these cursed coordinates, the wave might come, or it might not. The ocean does not care if we are paying attention. It only cares if we are ready. And readiness in this corridor, always and forever, is decided in the first 3 minutes. In most places, a small earthquake is just a small earthquake. But here, beneath the cold water south of Alaska, a small signal can still carry the memory of a very large wave. The magnitude 5.4 earthquake in Alaska was just one small piece in a much larger puzzle. A puzzle of a planet undergoing systematic change. Here, we don't just report numbers. We investigate the invisible data and the forgotten geological stories to ensure you have the perspective needed to navigate an increasingly unpredictable world. If you value these deep dives and the investigative meteorology we bring to your screen, please support our mission by hitting the subscribe button and turning on all notifications. It is the most effective way to ensure you never miss our next strategic report on atmospheric anomalies and the shifting forces of our Earth. Before you go, I have a request for our global community. Drop a comment below with the phrase, "I am ready," followed by your location. It's our way of taking a roll call, showing that from Alaska to Hawaii and across every shoreline in between, we are a community that chooses awareness over apathy. Thank you for joining our investigation tonight. I am your collaborator here at AstroWatch Lab. Stay vigilant, stay prepared, and I will see you in the next debrief. Stay safe, stay prepared.